رمضان يا شهر الصيام أتيتني فوجدتني ولقيتني مشتاقا ولقيتني أشكو الصبابة.
الحمد لله رب العالمين ثم الصلاة والسلام على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين. After praising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and rendering our thanks to our Creator Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is important for us to ponder on the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and be reminded of. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remind, for verily reminder benefits the believer. It benefits the believing soul. So we're here to be reminded of the very important verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the conditions of people, where He says, وَمَا بِكُم مِّن نِعْمَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ ثُمَّ إِذَا مَسَّكُمُ الضُّرُّ فَإِلَيْهِ تَجْأَرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in this verse says, highlighting to us for the purpose of acknowledgement, He says, وَمَا بِكُم مِّن نِعْمَةٍ فَمِنَ اللَّهِ. There's nothing, you will not find a blessing upon you. You will not come to a moment where you are in a state of blessing, except that blessing belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is a very important thing that we must understand. And that with that understanding comes thanking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, first and foremost, when we speak about the ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we speak about something that we cannot comprehend. For Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's blessing is beyond our understanding, as He says, وَإِن تَعُدُّوا نِعْمَةَ اللَّهِ لَا تُحْصُوهَا. That if you were to count the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you will not be able to count it and put a figure on it. So this is the first most important thing we must understand. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He has given us, blessed us, and also has legislated with that which He has legislated for us. Why? So that we can be thankful. We can be thankful of that blessing that He has given us. And that's why He orders us to be thankful for His blessings. And Imam Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyya, rahimahullah ta'ala, he highlights that from the means of being thankful, because when a slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminded of the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what should be that يعني يتبادر إلى ذهنه, that we should come to his mind is, okay, how could I be grateful of this blessing of Allah? So he says, he highlights that the ways of being grateful is of three types. Being acknowledging that blessing. And so this statement enables you to acknowledge that every blessing that you have passed through, every blessing that you will come to go through, they are all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so you become acknowledging, and so in your heart acknowledging of that, and also on your tongue you utter that, you mention that this is a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Allah has blessed you. Your statements highlight that, your condition highlight that, and also you know that this blessing, whether it is your health, whether it is your wealth, whether it is your family, whether it is everything that you know of, or things that you do not know. Yani one of the greatest blessings, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created you and perfected your creation and giving you abilities to accept goodness, to do goodness. Okay? So all this, whatever Allah has given you, and you will find there's no one that is not in the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There is no one. No human being will find themselves in a state that they avoid from the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, even in the moments of difficulties. Even in the moments of difficulties. So the third thing is that this person utilizes this ni'mah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given them to be thankful to Him, or to utilize it in a way of His ta'ah, in His obedience. Not show, because when a person does something good for you, what you show a sense of gratitude. So you need to show that sense of gratitude through your heart, through your verbally, and also through your actions. That you utilize that blessing that Allah has given you, your time, your wealth, in that which pleases Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because that is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إن كنتم إياه تعبدون. يعني be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if you are truly, okay, obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is being thankful to Allah is a sign of your obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is the sign of your appreciation to your Creator. So this is the first segment, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reminds us of our state, or that which He has blessed us with. And from that blessing as well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions, and obviously this surah, this verse comes in Surah An-Nahl, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He lays down out the blessing that He has blessed the human being with creating the heavens and the earth, with creating the human beings from droplets, and also from that which is given him, the earth, and also from the food that they eat, the cattle, and all this, all the ni'mah. He has ta'adad al-ni'mah. He mentions all that ni'mah, and at the end of that He mentions here. And this surah itself, it covers in highlighting the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala upon the creation. And from the verses that come to mind is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ مَكَّنَّاكُمْ فِي الْأَرْضِ وَجَعَلْنَا لَكُمْ فِيهَا مَعَايِشَ قَلِيلًا مَا تَشْكُرُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have made, يعني, you steadfast, or you affirmed you in this earth, يعني, giving you all the abilities to be able to sustain and to live in this on this earth, and also the things that you need to live your livelihood, or for your livelihood. But you find little who are grateful of that, and that is a blessing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is highlighting that we are grateful of that. So what is the state of the believer is to be grateful of the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not addressing us, it's not highlighting only the realities that we are in terms of where we are blessed, but He also mentioned the second part of it. He said, وَإِذَا مَسَّكُمُ الضُّرُّ فَإِلَيْهِ تَجْأَرُونَ. And this is a reality. A human being, yourself, you find yourself, whenever you are struck with something, an accident, or you lose someone, or something, your wealth or anything, you come to difficulty, what is the first thing? You turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَإِلَيْهِ تَجْأَرُونَ. يعني, and this word that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has utilized is the word taj'arun, يعني, is the sound that the bull makes when he's in the state of hunger. Okay, it is a very loud and hearable voice, call. And so this is the state of humans. When they're in difficulties, they turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, so it is sufficient for when He has blessed them, for them to be thankful. And if they know now, when that state of ni'mah does not remind them of being thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the state of difficulty should remind them. Why? Because they know when the difficulty struck them, the first one they turn to is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is by default highlights to you that there's none who can benefit or harm except Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The aspect of benefiting and the harming is in the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the hands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is also a call to the believer, and reminding of the state that sometimes, as we see ourselves when difficult, we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But that should not be the case only, but we should be turning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, yani in the state of sarra wa dharra, in the state of ease and also in the state of hardship. And finally, we need to remember that those who, yani the nature of the person who is forgetful, he forgets the ni'mah of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when he is blessed with, and then when he is stricken with difficulty, he turns to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is from the characteristics of the disbelievers. From the characteristics of the disbelievers and those who associate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those who associate with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this as well, yani, for someone who does not acknowledge the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the time where Allah has blessed him, is also in the state of kufr, in the state of denying the blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because you're supposed to, yani, when you're blessed, you're supposed to be يعني منقادا لله سبحانه وتعالى, to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not disobedient to him. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us from those who turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on all their state, in the state of ease and in the state of the hardship, and those who recognize when there is a state of blessing of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that this is blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, فَيُصْرِفُونَهَا, they disperse it in that which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with. And also when there is a state of hardship, they recognize that there is none who can benefit, and so they turn to their Creator Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Barakallahu fikum, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.